Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. It is great to have you with us on this Wednesday. Dave Revson and Rapheal Davis. I think we can say about basketball this past weekend, it was a rousing success for the Big Ten. Yesterday wasn't quite as good, although in the end, you do kind of get to that a win's a win with a couple of those teams.
A win is definitely a win, and Coach Painter used to always tell us, good teams find a way to win the ugly ones. Good teams find a way to win close games. They find a way to dig down in winning time and come away with victories. You got to see that last night.
There were some ugly ones, and there were Big Ten teams finding a way to win, at least in two of them. That is our big story. We saw Indiana top Morehead State by 1. Finished the game on a 20-4 run after they were down by as many as 15. Maryland was down 9 in the second half against Nichols, but they rallied to win it by 6. And then a wild one in Charlotte. Michigan falling to a pretty good Florida team in double overtime. This despite 33 points from Doug McDaniel. Let's dive into it. Let's start with the Hoosiers. We're going to accentuate the positive. And you said it. I'm interested to have you elaborate on it. They won. They figured out a way to win, and they won when they were in a big hole, which I have to believe gives you some confidence and gives you something that during the course of the year you can point to and say, hey, we've done this before.
Yeah, because we can dig back into our principles and understand that could win us games. You look at Indiana last night, it took them 31, 32 minutes to really dig into this game, and once they did defensively, they took it over. You look at a guy, Jordan Latham, was having his way all game long, ended the game with 30 points, but he didn't score from the 9-minute mark on. Not that he not just score, but he didn't even take a field goal attempt. Trey Galloway shut the water off there, and then from the 8-minute, 30-second mark on, Morehead State goes 2 for 13 from the field. They attempt 0 free throws, and Indiana just imposed their will on the inside offensively, and that's who Indiana is this year. Dominate the inside, control the boards, 15 offensive rebounds, 16 second chance points, and that started to show down the stretch.
I think there were some positives, too, just in terms of personnel. Anthony Walker is the most obvious one. I mean, he had his best game as a Hoosier, the transfer from Miami, stepping up in a big way. Again, that's someone we've talked a lot about how short this bench has been for IU, particularly with Xavier Johnson out. He was still out last night. Having Walker to turn to helps a lot.
Yeah, because the bench didn't give him anything against Kansas in limited minutes. And you heard Anthony Walker talk out after the game. He wanted to come in and just give more energy, defend at a high level, cut to the basket more offensively, and it paid off for him. 18 points, 9 rebounds on the night. And every game is going to be somebody different. Our college coach used to tell us that in the locker room before games, is that this guy may win us a game. It may be our starters. It may be our best player. But sometimes your role player is going to win you a game. And Anthony Walker stepped up in a big way. Mackenzie Mbako had a big-time second half after struggling in the first half. 11 of his 13 came after the break. And then they just went back to Khalil Ware. Indiana cannot have a half of basketball with Khalil Ware having 0 points. That's just not Indiana basketball. That's not good enough. He had 10 points in the second half. They just started to look better on the offensive end.
They did. And as you said, defensively, they needed stops, and they came up with stops down the stretch. And as a result, they avoid what would have been a damaging loss. You figure out a way to win the game. And Maryland did the same thing. They were sluggish. I think it's a similar narrative. They avoided what would have been a costly defeat. Remember, they got to go cross-country now coming up and playing UCLA over the weekend. So you imagine kind of what that trip would have been, even just heading out there, coming off of a loss to Nichols. There are things to be concerned about, but again, let's start what was the most positive thing that you saw from Maryland?
Dante Scott. Dante Scott was big time. Coming into this game, he had been struggling over the last 4 games. Dante was only averaging just over 4 points a game on 22% from the field, had 2 assists in the last 4 games and 6 turnovers. The super senior wasn't feeling good about himself. And you could see in the post-game press conference, he was smiling, he was happy, he was energetic. He had 15 points. He was 4 of 8 from the three-point line. He came into this game 1 of his last 11. So it was really good to see him get back going because he's got to be productive. They go out to UCLA. Jameer Young's going to bring it. He had 23 and 11 rebounds last night. He's going to produce. Julian Reese is going to have to bring it. But if Dante Scott, if he can't be productive, he can't be efficient, Maryland's going to struggle all season.
And they're going to struggle, frankly, when Julian Reese isn't great on the offensive end, and he was not great. It felt like maybe the free throw shooting issues kind of got to him, and maybe snowball a little bit. He was fabulous defensively and really good on the glass, and probably without his defense, I'm not sure that they win the game. But that is the concern, right? They just don't have that many offensive options. And so it feels like you kind of need everyone to be playing well, and Dante Scott's a big part of that. I would also say, man, Jahari Long hit a couple big shots.
Yeah.
Couple big shots when they really needed them.
Yeah, the last 2 games off the bench, he's gave them 8 points. And it's been big shots and big moments. He's great on the defensive end, bringing energy. He gets him out in transition a little bit more. With he and Jameer Young in the backcourt, they're a little bit faster. And that's what it takes. It takes role guys to step up in big moments. And also, they got to find ways to keep stealing baskets. Maryland, they want to turn you over to get them out in transition. But last night, they were to come away with 19-second chance points off 14 offensive rebounds. But like you mentioned, you talk about Julian Reese. At home, he's a monster. Coming into that game, he was averaging 19 and 13 at home. But when he plays away from the Xfinity Center, he struggles. Only 11 points a game, 7 rebounds on 43% from the field. He can't go to UCLA and have that type of performance and expect to win.
I do want to get into Michigan, and man, they really were 1 rebound away from winning this game in overtime. They gave up an offensive rebound. They're down 3. They chose not to foul. I think it probably was too early to foul, probably, right? But let Florida get a shot, missed it. Florida gets the offensive rebound. We talked about they're a really good offensive rebounding team. They corralled that. They kick it back out. They get a 3. They send it to double overtime, and they dominate the double overtime. So you're literally 1 play away. But this has been a theme here for Michigan now over the last couple of years. This just isn't a team that is finishing off those close games, Rapheal.
Yeah, because that's the game. Coming into it, you understand Florida is one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the country. So all week long, coaches expressing that to the guys. When that shot goes up, you got to find the body and hit them. And it came down to that offensive rebound because you score 100 points. Doug McDaniel gets you 33 points, 8 rebounds. Conway gets you 21-11. You make 10 threes, you should win that game. And they just didn't come away with it because you give up 21 offensive rebounds, led to 18-second chance points, and then you turn it over 16 times, leading to 16 points off turnovers for Florida. Those 2 things are really what matters. Those are the little things in games that you have to take care of, and they just didn't.
And again, this has been a theme. So now you go back to the beginning of last year. In games decided by 5 points or fewer or in overtime, they're 5-15. And you think about how narrowly they missed the NCAA tournament a year ago. I mean, you flip a few of those games here and there, and you find yourself in the dance. And this year they have dug themselves a hole. And again, the close games, they just haven't figured out a way to win.
And I think you have some encouragement from this game because you could look at how you guys played, but you tell your guys, we take care of the ball, we're in better position. We rebound the ball at the end, we're in better position. And then we've got to make our layups. Michigan was minus 22 in the paint, but they were 11-27 on layups. When you get inside, you got to go to finish. You can't just go to get fouled because they make a few more layups, they get a few more rebounds, they don't turn the ball over. They're in good shape. And then you look at the bench production. The bench gave them nothing. The bench was outscored by 40 points. One of those guys that could come in the game and be effective and produce off the bench just a little bit.
It's pretty interesting to look at how much the starters played. I mean, every single one of them, 5 starters, they all played at least 44 minutes.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And by contrast, no one on Florida played more than 40 minutes. So you're talking about every single guy is out there for essentially the entire game. I mean, you had a few substitutes coming in, 5-10 minutes at most. But this is where they are, and it's going to be challenging. And I understand, obviously, Jalen Llewellyn's been banged up, and they were counting on getting more out of him. It's been minimal here these last couple games after he sat out the game against Iowa. But Jace Howard's hurt. But there just isn't a whole lot of production there. And when you get into a game like that was up and down, where Florida's beating you up on the glass in the way that they were, it just feels like in that second overtime, they kind of ran out of gas.
They just ran out of gas, and then you look forward to the next game because you remember that Oregon game. They went out there, Doug gets some 30 in a tight game, an emotional game, and then the 3 games after that, Doug averages 11 points on 20% from the field. It just wore him out. He didn't have a sub to come in and help him control the ball, control the pace. You need guys like Will Cheddar to come in and be effective. You need guys like George Washington to figure it out. A highly touted freshman can make shots. He's got to come in a game and be effective because this is a long Big Ten season. This is a grind. There's no other words for it. And if you run your guys into the dirt early, it's going to be a long season, especially when you depend on making shots from deep like a Michigan does.
And it affects the defense, right?
Sure.
Florida was about 1.2 points per possession, shade under that. It's hard to win games when your opponent is up in that range. So much more. All those teams gunning for a spot in the college football playoff. Michigan, of course, getting set to battle Alabama on New Year's Day in Pasadena. We look at the quarterbacks here. J.J. McCarthy, second in the nation in completion percentage, but Alabama's Jalen Milroe actually higher than McCarthy when it comes to passing yards per game and pass efficiency. Both are mobile, though running is a bigger part of Milroe's game. 12 TDs on the ground to JJ's 3. Wanted to get in some football talk today, and to do that, we welcome in the most accomplished graduate of St. Francis Prep in New York ever to grace the airwaves of the Big Ten Network. And I say that fully cognizant of the fact that it is also Jerry DiNardo's alma mater. So it's not a very high bar, Ralph, but you crossed it. Ralph Russo of the AP is with us. Ralph, welcome. I'm going to start with this. We haven't spoken to you since the great debate. Bama, Florida State, how did you feel about the decision that was made?
Oh, wow. I think I understand how you get to that decision. And I could understand being in the room and getting to that decision. I did not like the decision. I think it goes against competition. It goes against what we know is sort of at the heart of sports, which is you win something, you accomplish something, and then you get something for that accomplishment. You know, I know college football is not the NFL, but the idea of, well, I've had people ask me this. Well, if the Eagles were the #1 seed and Jalen Hurts got hurt in the final game, would they not be the #1 seed anymore? Like, that's overly simplistic, but I think that vibe is the reason why you don't do what the committee did to Florida State.
Fair enough. Again, to me, the committee was asked the question of pick us the 4 best teams. I mean, do you think Florida State's better than Alabama?
And that's it. So that's why I even prefaced it. Like, I get it. I understand if you're given that question in a room full of people. It just doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel right. Right. It may answer the question correctly, but boy, like, is that the way we want to do this in college football? Do we want to be projecting ahead? It really didn't sit right with me.
Understood. And obviously you have a lot of company in that regard. As it is now, so we have this matchup, Michigan and Alabama. We're showing the quarterback breakdown there. Alabama is really good. They've gotten better as the year's gone on. I think other than the Auburn game, which is always a wild game, you can see how different this team is from when they played Texas and when they played USF to where they are now. How do you break down this matchup? Like, what would it take here for Michigan to come out on top?
Yeah, I think it's the evolution of Alabama, and one particular, there's a lot of attention, the evolution of Jalen Milroe. Well, of course, he's the quarterback, and he's become a better player. But how much of that is tied to the evolution of Alabama's offensive line? Yeah. It's an offensive line that struggled mightily during the season at certain times to protect Milroe. I think that goes hand in hand, him becoming more comfortable being in the pocket and what to do with the ball, getting rid of the ball, but also his offensive line and some of the young guys on the left side of that offensive line, not just being good enough players. We know Alabama's always got good enough players, but being a little more cohesive, understanding who they're supposed to block. And I think that's maybe one of the keys for Michigan here. I still think that's an offense in Alabama that may not be as efficient. And what can Michigan, with its very good defensive line, lots of different bodies, what can you throw at them, not just with athletically, but schematically, to maybe Michigan can find that early season Alabama offensive line that had a lot of breakdowns.
So your take seems to be that the way for Michigan to win this game is to figure out a way to slow down Alabama's offense. Is that that kind of what I should take from that?
I think you have to probably force a couple of turnovers from Milroe. I think you have to prevent Milroe. I think I texted this to somebody recently. I think the number would be, if you can keep Milroe's runs, because he's an explosive runner, to fewer than 3 15-yard runs. If you can keep him like under those big explosive runs, I think that's a key. On the other side of the ball, I think you're probably going to need to have a really good game from J.J. McCarthy. And again, I think it becomes a little bit about, I hate to say it, this is about coaching, but it is going to be a little bit about coaching and scheme. You're not just going to be able to line up and mash Alabama the way Michigan does with so many other opponents. So you can run the ball against them, but how are you going to run the ball? Can you be creative in your running game? Can you present Alabama, what they call eye candy, right? Different formations, different motions to get them moving in weird directions, because they're just a big, strong physical team. So the idea of simply moving them out of the way is a lot tougher. So what can you scheme up to allow your running game to be successful? Not that you have to necessarily start running the option and triple option here, but do some different things to get Alabama's defense moving around.
So I will be in Pasadena for that one, anchoring our coverage there. You will be in New Orleans for the other college football playoff semifinal, Texas and Washington. Quick thumbnail of how you see that one playing out.
Yeah, I think interesting insofar as I think it's going to play out very differently than Alabama-Michigan. I think Alabama-Michigan is going to be relatively a defensive struggle. You're probably looking at the winning team maybe getting into the high 20s. I would be surprised if the winning team for Texas and Washington didn't get near 40 points. It's certainly in the mid 30s. Penix is amazing. And if they can give him time to throw, there's a lot of plays to be made against a Texas secondary that's got some question marks. And I think Texas's offense, Sark, is terrific. They've got a lot of different weapons to really attack that Washington defense. So I just think of it interesting insofar as it's going to be a very different matchup. I think the points are going to be a lot easier to come by with in the Sugar Bowl than in the Rose Bowl.
I want to talk about some other stuff, but I'm going to put you on the spot with the playoff real quick. Who do you think comes out on top? Who's our national champ?
I think it's going to be Alabama.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
I'm definitely not playing to the home crowd.
No,
here,
you're not.
Right?
No, but that's okay. I mean, I didn't ask you to tell me Michigan's going to win. I asked you to tell me who you think's going to win. What's the difference? Is it just Saban with a lot of time? Is it the fact that they're getting better? What puts you over the top?
I do think Saban with a lot of time, a lot of athletes, and a lot of different roads to victory here. But again, like, this is clearly, I think it's still conceivably the worst Alabama team we've seen in a few years,
right.
which I think speaks to Alabama, right? The worst Alabama team we've seen in a few years might still win a national championship. I think the roads to victory here, they can win in a few different ways. And I think the one thing that's probably been overlooked with Alabama is just how good that defense is. I mean, they've got about 4 or 5 guys who are going to be first-round draft picks.
No doubt. Got a great edge rusher, have a couple really good corners. We talk about there isn't a ton of explosion at the skill positions like there normally is with Alabama, but it is offset by how good that defense is. We mentioned National Signing Day coming in. And, National Signing Day, first of all, it's shifted, right? It used to be in February, now it's in December. But there's so much else going on in college football, namely the portal, which we'll get to in a moment. How do you feel like the importance of this day has changed? Is it more important for some programs than for others? Like, do we look at National Signing Day differently than we did even 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, we definitely look at it differently. I would suggest it's just as important because you're still building the foundation of your program. You can do some things in the transfer portal that are transformational, but if you're not recruiting well out of high school, good luck competing for a national championship or championships at any level. We are treating it differently because it is packed into this ridiculously crowded calendar of December in college football, where you have the postseason and the offseason and transfers, and it's just, there's too much going on here in December. I think what they're going to need to do is punt this out of December. It was a pretty good idea before the portal became a thing. It was not a bad idea before the college football playoff expanded, which it's going to do next year. This early signing period, which I guess is about 5 or 6 years old, probably needs to just be eliminated. Go back to putting signing day in February. There's just too much going on here. Not just for us who cover the sport, but frankly for the coaches who have to, spin a lot of different plates.
Interesting you would say that. Of course, the coaches would love to move it up, right? They'd love to have it be in July. But but it seems like maybe that would serve their purposes more than it would serve the players' purposes, because the portal is such a huge part of what's going on here that part of it is you almost feel like players are starting to gauge, okay, like who are these guys going after in the portal and what will that mean for me? I mean, this Dylan Raiola story has been fascinating here over the last couple of weeks because Cal McCord made a visit there. He's got a couple of years of eligibility left. Does Dylan Raiola, does he want to go where Cal McCord goes? Like, how much is all of this intertwined right now, Ralph, between the decisions these players are making, NIL, the portal? Like, are they so inextricably linked that you can't separate them?
Yeah, they have to be to a certain degree because it's all team building, right? I mean, these schools are now running personnel departments similar to the way NFL teams do, right? They have their recruiting board of high school kids. They have their recruiting board of free agents coming from the portal, even projecting who might be a free agent, who could end up being in the portal in a couple of years or this year. So without question, the rosters are being built in a way that combines the two. So it would only be smart for the kids who are doing the signing and choosing what teams to play for to consider how these teams are building their rosters. I do think a little separation wouldn't hurt. You mentioned a pre-season signing day. I worry what that means to high school football.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't know if the we talk kids, the players. I don't know if the players are really benefiting that much from this December signing period. I think the coaches at one point were, because then they could scratch this off and say, okay, I got my signing class in the bag in December and I can just do other things the rest of the year. But there's so much already now going on in December. It might be better off, okay, December will be my transfer month. Then I have a month to let that breathe, see what I need in my recruiting class, and also let the kids, as you said, as the players, see what the signing classes look like. Maybe that better informs, the transfer classes look like. Right. Maybe that better informs where I sign out of high school.
Last question for you here, Ralph. You've covered this sport for a long time. You cover it so incredibly well and thoughtfully. We're in an age where things have changed, I'd say, more dramatically in the last 5 years than they probably changed in the previous 25 combined, maybe even longer. Portal, NIL, realignment has been a huge story, maybe the biggest story of this past year. What's the next big story, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I think we are still we're not in the end game of NIL. And I think NIL becoming something that looks more like truly paying players, right? Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, released a proposal. And I even use that word proposal lightly because really it was a conversation starter. It's not a formal proposal in the way, legislation gets made. And essentially it was this idea that you create a new division of Division I or a new subdivision of Division I, and you could pay the players up to $30,000 a year in a trust fund. We are moving toward an area where these schools are going to have to be more actively involved in the compensation. That will change the way NIL works to a certain degree. As scary as that might sound to some, I think it would be better because you get the schools in control more. You create a little more structure in all of this that seems a little bit loosey-goosey. I hate to use the term Wild West. I think that's a little bit of a pejorative that scares people. But right now, there's not enough formality to what's going on with player acquisition and things along those lines. And I think it would be better if the schools were more involved. So I think the next layer of this, the next big change on the horizon, is getting schools more involved in some way in compensation.
Ralph Russo, you can hear him on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. Obviously, read all of his work on the AP as well. Does an amazing job covering the sport that we all love. Ralph, I hope to see you in Houston. That would be really, really good for me. And it wouldn't be entirely about seeing you. I mean, partially, but not entirely.
At least a little. Yes. I know I'll be in Houston.
You'll
be there. I look forward to hopefully seeing you there.
I need a little help. I'm going to have one of your predictions go awry, though. Ralph Russo, great stuff. Happy holidays. Go St. Francis Terriers. Thank you.
You too. Thanks, Dave.
Yet another amazing honor for Caitlin Clark as she and Maryland's Angel Reese were named Sporting News Athletes of the Year yesterday, joining a list of historic luminaries that includes LeBron James, Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, among others. I think I said Maryland for Angel Reese. LSU's Angel Reese, formerly Maryland's Angel Reese. An outstanding story accompanies that award, a story written by our pal and Big Ten Network contributor, Mike DeCourcy. Mike joins me. Mike, this is a tough assignment. Let's start with that. SI got some really serious criticism. They do a Sportsman of the Year, and they chose Deion Sanders. And obviously, this is different. It's Athlete of the Year versus Sportsman of the Year. But again, I think it shows how hard it is to pick this out. Why these two? Like, why did you decide on Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark?
Well, our staff voted, our editors discussed it. We had a lot of different conversations about this. And what it was that led us to select them was the way in which they elevated their sport to much more of a mainstream conversation. The 10 million people, give or take a person or two, that watched the championship game, it peaked at 12 million at one point during the game. That's never been reached before by a women's basketball championship game. It's an amazing number. It's nearly double what the best prior number for ESPN was in their broadcasts, which have gone back around 30 years or so of the women's Final Four. So that was a big part of it. And obviously with name, image, and likeness and them being able to take advantage of that, you saw Caitlin in television commercials, you saw Angel in television commercials, you saw each of them involved with very high-profile companies, and they're lifting the sport of women's basketball to a more prominent position. And what I talked about in the article was you go back and Magic Johnson, Larry Bird in 1979 drew an audience of 40 million. And a lot of people look at that as a launching point for college basketball, men's college basketball, to be what it is today. Well, we've never reached 40 million again. But it sparked the interest in March that we now see where, okay, you don't get 40 million for the title game anymore with television splintering and all of that, but you get every game is interesting and everybody's watching every game. And I can tell you, as someone who grew up loving the game of college basketball, in 1971, you didn't get to watch round one on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't there. And now that game is everywhere. And every game is everywhere. And that's true with the women's game and the men's game. So I think that what we're seeing with the two of them is an elevation of the sport in the way that Magic and Bird did it, in the way that the 1999 Women's World Cup team did with their championship game against China. U.S. women's national team now has celebrities like Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, who are as well known as any athletes in America.
The article is really great, and I thought one of the things that was interesting was you had the opportunity to speak to both of them for the article. You spoke to them and then also spoke to a lot of people around them. And this, to me, like, it's a watershed moment for the reasons that you're talking about, for the impact that it has on women's sports more broadly. Do you think that they had a sense of kind of what a big deal this was, not just this award, but kind of all of this, everything that's happened in the last year in women's college basketball?
I think they do, yes. At the time, at the championship game that Sunday afternoon in April, I don't think either of them realized what exactly was transpiring because although certainly Caitlin could see how passionately Iowa fans followed the Lady Hawks all the way through from, I believe it was home, then to Seattle, and then to Dallas through the course of the NCAA tournament. They were everywhere. Caitlin told me that Iowa fans came to Dallas for the Final Four even if they couldn't get tickets because they wanted to be part of the scene. That says a lot about where the women's basketball program at Iowa has come as a result of having Caitlin Clark as a member. She is spectacular to watch. I will say this, I just so loved talking to both of them. They were so engaging as interview subjects. It really fed into the idea that, yes, these are two people who are ready to elevate women's basketball even more than it has in the past. And I spoke to our friend Stephanie White, who's now the coach of the Connecticut Sun and does a lot of television work, as well as the great Nancy Lieberman, who was a legend back when I was in college, and she was in college around the same time, and she was winning championships at Old Dominion. And you could tell the appreciation that those two had. Nancy was there at the very start. Steph won a championship with Purdue about, midway through, about 20 years ago. And so you could see that they could understand that the two of these two young women are elevating the game and the audience for this game in a way that it really deserves and that it's needed for a long time.
Well, it's a really good article, and again, encourage everyone to read it on the Sporting News. Mike wrote the article, and again, tremendous insight there, not just on both of those players, but I think on what it means more broadly in the world of sport. I do want to, we've been promoting the first bracketology. We're going to be talking about this now weekly between now and Selection Sunday, so I did want to get into that a little bit. Again, Mike was doing this, came out yesterday, 4 Big Ten teams earning top 4 seeds. It includes Purdue as a 1 seed, Illinois a 3, Ohio State, Wisconsin 4s. 4 more teams would be in, though it is tenuous with all of them. Northwestern and Nebraska 11 seeds, Michigan State and Indiana 12s. Mike, ultimately we had 8 Big Ten teams make it a year ago. Only 2 of them were top 4 seeds last year. You had Purdue as a 1, Indiana as a 4. So how would you compare where we are this year at the top of the Big Ten to where we were a season ago?
Dave, Saturday was enormous for this conference because before that day happened, with the victory for Michigan State over Baylor and the victory for Purdue over Arizona, and even to an extent, Indiana's great success for 38 minutes against Kansas. I think all of that helped elevate the Big Ten in a way that the first month or so didn't really. It hadn't gone as well, but that turned around a lot. They got a lot of big wins on that weekend and made a difference for the conference profile. When I got done with the bracket and I saw that there were 8 Big Ten teams, and remember, I'm not calculating that as I go along, I said, can I justify that? And then I went and I looked at the net rankings, and darned if the Big Ten's not still second overall behind the Big 12 in the net rankings. So you can see that there are a lot of teams that are very much on the edge here. Michigan State, one of the maybe the last team I put in. Certainly the Baylor game was a big part of that. Indiana among the last teams. Northwestern probably would have been more solid, but the Chicago State loss certainly hurt them. It can be better if these teams all play well in conference play, but I'm not sure, other than maybe like a Purdue, that anybody's getting in this year with a 500 league record. I think you're going to have to be probably over this year in this year's Big Ten to get in, unless you really did something extraordinary. And I think probably only Purdue fits the category, and I don't think they're going to go 500 in the Big Ten.
No, I would be very surprised were that to happen. How would you compare this year's Purdue team to last year's Purdue team?
Oh, it's a better team. For starters, the freshman guards are now sophomore guards, and Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer both have gained experience and gained confidence from that. I think Fletcher still plays a little bit up and down. He has unbelievable games and then games where he doesn't matter as much. But I think the fact that Miles Colvin is sitting there as someone who can really make a difference is both empowering to the team, but also makes sure that Fletcher plays his absolute best, because he knows if he doesn't, that Miles continues to get better and more experienced, and he's there to take minutes away. So I think Fletcher has shown it's not about the opposition. He had his best game, or one of his best games, against Arizona. It's just about apparently how he feels that night. But he can continue to improve over the course of the year. They're much deeper when they take Zach Edey out, because he can't play 40 minutes. And that's not a knock, because very few guys his size could, if maybe none. When they take him out, they have a really nice combo now. They've got a great idea about how to do it when he's out of the game. I think they're a much better team than they were a year ago. And they were terrific a year ago. They are by far the most accomplished team in Division I this year. If they play in the Big Ten as they've played during the non-conference, they will enter the NCAA tournament as a number 1 seed and probably the number 1 seed.
Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News, and of course our colleague here at the Big Ten Network for many years. Mike, we are looking forward to working with you again this year. And again, congrats on a great story on Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. And enjoy the holidays, my friend.
Happy holidays, Dave.
Just rejoins me. He is studying the Dolphins, getting his details on them in between segments. But let's dive into the top of the Big Ten. And you heard Mike talk about Purdue, and I think we can all agree Purdue's the best team in the Big Ten. Probably isn't all that close. It was interesting to see it from a bracketology perspective, kind of who's next. I'm interested in, as you evaluate these teams, as you watch them, who you think the next best team in the Big Ten is. Let's start with number 2. We'll count down a little ways here, but who's the second best team?
I would go Illinois. They got the second best player in the league in Terrence Shannon. You look at the game against FAU, Marcus Domask goes off for 33 points. That's who he is at his best. Coleman Hawkins, he's been great the last 2 games, averaging 14 points a contest. And then Quincy Guerrier, he's starting to figure out exactly what Coach Underwood wants for him at that 4 position, long, athletic wing. Last 2 games, he's been averaging over 18 points a game on 55% from the field. Ty Rodgers, one of the best defenders in the league. I think with the size, the length, the athleticism what Illinois has, one of the best defenses in the country. They can figure out off the offensive flow, the 3s, the 2s.
Right.
They'd be sitting right there.
More experienced team than last year, significantly more experienced. They really went with those older players in the portal, and they just feel more connected, don't they? There just feels like there's more chemistry on the court for whatever reason with this group. So the Illini second, and again, that would play along with what Mike had in terms of the bracketology too. Who would you have third?
Ohio State, one of the best offenses in the country when you look at KenPom. I believe they have one of the better backcourts in the Big Ten and across the country. When you look at Roddy Gale, Bruce Thornton, Jamison Battle, one of those guys can get you 20 on any given night. And then you look at the post combination of Isaiah Key and Felix Akpara, and we don't talk enough about their bigs, but quietly they're averaging 15 points, 13 rebounds, over 2 blocks per game. So when you have a good perimeter, a great backcourt to go along with front court production, and they've bought in on the defensive end, they figured it out as well.
No doubt, much better defensively than they were a year ago. And Zedke's healthy. I mean, we forget that he just wasn't healthy down the stretch last year either. So who comes after Ohio State?
I'm still going Michigan State. And I know they struggled this season, but I like to judge teams at who they are at their best. And we've seen Michigan State defensively at their best against Baylor. You understand how Baylor likes to win. I still believe, although they're struggling offensively, Michigan State has one of the better defensive backcourts in the country. As Matty Sissoko, Carson Cooper, if they can be productive at the 5, along with their freshmen continuing to grow, you see Cohen Carr now starting to shoot pull-up jumpers, starting to play more off of the bounce. I think Michigan State, although they've struggled, they're shooting it better now from deep. They're going to figure it out.
Their shooting was inexplicably bad early, and it's gotten better. I mean, this was one of the best perimeter shooting teams in the country a year ago. It just felt like they were going to be able to shoot their way out of that to a certain extent, and they have. So that would be a team, again, based on kind of where they've been so far this year. You're obviously projecting we're going to see a lot more of what we saw against Baylor and Oakland and less of what we saw early on in the year. So who's after the Spartans?
Wisconsin. You got a core of Tyler Wall, Stephen Crowd, Chucky Hepburn. That's a really good core in the Big Ten. And then you add a guy like A.J. Storr, athletic wing, can score all 3 levels, can make a 3, can drive the basketball, can get to the free throw line. He's the piece athletically that Wisconsin was missing last season. John Blackwell has been special this season as a freshman, probably one of the better freshmen, maybe freshman of the year to this point in the Big Ten. If they can figure a way to get Connor Season to figure it out on a defensive end, this team will be cooking with gas. I think they're a much more cohesive group offensively. Now they're more athletic and longer on a defensive end. It's just about getting all the pieces right.
They just have more options, too. I mean, it just felt like last year, I've said this before, too, it just felt like it came down to Chucky Hepburn late in the clock trying to make something happen, and it was unfair to him. I mean, it's not really the player that he is. He's a great facilitator. He's a really talented guy, but he's not that end of the shot clock guy every time. No one is. I mean, there are a few guys who can play that role, but as you say, so many guys now that have stepped up, and Storr's a huge part of it. The bigs are a lot better, too. Stephen Crowell's had a nice year. Got time for one more. Who would be next after that?
Northwestern, one of my favorite players in the Big Ten, Boo Buie. He's been sensational this season. Struggled as of late, but he's still averaging 18 and 5. And then the player that's starting to figure it out, a transfer, Ryan Langborg. The last 4 games, he's been really special. 18 points a game, 4 assists, over 2 steals. He's turning into that Batman to Boo Buie's Robin. If they can get some paint production, because you get a Brooks Barnheiser could be one of the better two-way players in the league, but they can get Hunger or Preston or Nicholson to give them something as a collective. Maybe it's 12-6 as a collective between all three of them. They will be much better. And then they got to figure out a way to keep Ty Berry going. He can't have the ebbs and flows that he had last season. He's got to be consistent and be productive. The last two games, he struggled and they've struggled. They're a guard-driven team. It takes all four of their players to be on.
Right. They don't have a ton of depth. They don't have a lot of guys that they can turn to on the bench. So they need their best players to play well. When they were at their best, we saw that against Purdue. I mean, that group was absolutely fabulous. You want to talk about teams we've seen at their best and at their worst.
Right.
Right. We saw them against Purdue. We saw them against Chicago State. If the answer is somewhere in the middle, then they'll probably be hanging around Mike's bracket. It's a big game tonight. Arizona State, game that's being played in Phoenix, not far from ASU's campus, a big one. Those are one of those games that
you got to get.
Yeah, it's not going to necessarily get you in if you get it, but losing that one would be not a positive thing on your resume. Let's put it there. The dramatic conclusion here that Braden Smith of Purdue is putting together, better than 14 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds. He's one of just 3 players in the nation hitting those numbers. His 5.7 rebounds per game is 3rd in the nation for players 6 feet tall or shorter. He and Fletcher Lawyer have just been great for Purdue. I've already eliminated some of the suspense. Rapheal's going to rank the top backcourts in the Big Ten. I've already told you Purdue isn't number 1, but we're going to have a little bit of drama. We'll count it down from number 4. Where are you starting there?
I'm starting with Illinois. You look at Illinois, you look at a guy like Terrence Shannon, probably the best guard in the Big Ten. A guy, Marcus Domass, can score 30 points as we've seen him do in Madison Square Garden against FAU. Those two guys keep you in the game at all times, but I don't think people give enough credit to Ty Rodgers. I look at Ty Rodgers like I did in Nogel Eastern during the 2019 Big Ten season, a defensive guard that can set up the offense, but he goes in, once he initiates the offense, he goes into an offensive rebounder mode. So as some guards that can't shoot the ball from deep, you don't guard him. But you have to know what Ty Rodgers is at all times on the floor, and then defensively, he takes any guard out of the game.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that he literally, I don't think he's attempted a 3 all year. I mean, it's weird from your point guard, but again, he brings so much else, and a lot of that has to do with his size. So they're number 4. Who's number 3?
Michigan State. Michigan State came into the season as supposed to be the best backcourt in the entire country, and now they're starting to figure it out more so on a defensive end. Tyson Walker's been great all season long, averaging 20 points a game, just dominating games, scoring the basketball all 3 levels. But I look at what they did against Baylor on a defensive end. Baylor's guards came into that game, the 4 guards, averaging 50-plus points a game. Michigan State held them to 29 points on 28 field goal attempts. That's big-time defense. When your guards can take opposing perimeters out of the basketball game, it gives you a chance. And then you judge them at their best. A.J. Hoggard is one of the better guards in the Big Ten. Jaden Akins is a 38-40% three-point shooter when he's knocking down shots. So Michigan State at their best is definitely one of the best backcourts in the league.
Don't sleep on Trey Holloman either. I've been impressed with the improvement he's shown. So who's number 2? I think we can guess who's number 2 because I said they're not number 1.
The Boilermakers. And it took a lot for me not to make them number 1 because when you see what they've done against ranked teams, you look at Fletcher Lawyer against Tennessee, 27 points. You look against Arizona, 27 points, 18 in the first half. You go to Braden Smith, 18, 5-5 against Tyler Kolek and Marquette. 27 against Alabama, 8 assists, and then a 27 against Arizona. Those 2 guys have been big time all season long in the big moments. And then you look at adding Lance Jones in the mix. I put him in there defensively. He can take opposing guards out of the game. You can put him on a 1 through the 3. And then offensively, you have to guard him. We talked about last season in Wisconsin, depending on Chucky Hepburn. It was depending on Braden Smith a lot last season, driving the basketball. Lance Jones is taking that pressure off of him.
We saved the best for last, and that is?
Ohio State. As Everett Turner says, the Ohio State University. Those 3 guards have been sensational all year long, averaging over 47 points a game, 12 rebounds a game, 9 assists a game as a collective. And something special about Ohio State's guards. Each of those guards are shooting it above 38% from 3. You think about Jamison Battle 2 seasons ago, honorable All-Big Ten at Minnesota, averaging 17 points a game, and now he's their 3rd guy. So if you got to put your 3rd best defender on Jamison Battle on the perimeter, you're going to have a long night.
Yes, good luck with that. So you got the game tomorrow.
Yep.
Purdue and Jacksonville. You know the greatest player in the history of Jacksonville basketball?
I do not.
Artist Gilmore. You ever
Oh,
heard of
really?
Artist
I
Gilmore?
do know Artist Gilmore. I didn't know
big
that.
A. Yeah, you might want to throw that out there on the
I might use that.
Brock. You don't even need to credit me. It's fairly well known publicly.
That's funny.
All right, have a great call. We will see you next time.